Today we have as our guest Dr. Diane Forbes Berthoud. Dr. Forbes Berthoud is an Associate Vice Chancellor for Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion at the University of California, San Diego. Her responsibilities include strategic planning, advancing institutional effectiveness, serving as a liaison to human resources, and leading diversity-focused community engagement and campus-wide initiatives. As a member of the Vice Chancellor's leadership team, she represents the Vice Chancellor on high-level task forces, advisory groups, and system-wide work groups. As of July, Dr. Forbes Berthoud will serve as the inaugural Vice President and Chief Diversity Officer of the University of Maryland, Baltimore. Congratulations.
Thank you.
She will report to President Bruce E. Jarrell and serve on the university cabinet. She will also collaborate with the Provost/Executive Vice President and with university deans and vice presidents. Dr. Forbes Berthoud has over 23 years of experience working in higher education, nonprofit, and government. Her previous positions include lead consultant in organizational effectiveness and diversity initiatives for the Montgomery County government in Maryland, an associate professor and chair of communication at Trinity University in DC, a visiting professor at George Mason University, and a senior fellow at the University of Maryland, College Park in leadership and public policy. She has been awarded faculty fellowships in the areas of women's leadership, community-based research, public policy, and dialogue from Georgetown University, the Washington Area Women's Foundation, and the Interactivity Foundation. She received her PhD in organizational communication and social psychology from Howard University. Welcome to Diane Forbes Berthoud, my friend and fantastic woman, who I call Di, or Diane for this interview. Welcome.
Hello, Heather. Hello, listeners. Heather, my friend. Thank you. Thank you so much for the opportunity to share with you today.
You are most welcome. Listen, after that intro, there's no wonder why I have you on today talking about leadership. So we're going to get right into it. Leadership as it impacts women in general, women of color in particular. So I'd like to start with, what's your definition of leadership, and how does it compare to what we find in textbooks, given your experiences?
Thank you for the question. I think that my views about leadership are informed by the scholarship to some degree, and also by my experience. And so how would I define it as it relates to women, as it relates to the world community? It would be in and around impact, social influence. And when I say social, I am thinking about the human element of our life, right? So what are the ways in which human beings, in this case, our conversation today, how have women impacted the processes, the procedures, the policies, the outcomes for other people? So I'm concerned about influence and impact. And to me, that's a central focus of leadership.
When was the first time you actually felt yourself to be a leader?
My feeling about myself as a leader came from social and community messages. Primarily, especially in the beginning, teachers who would ask me to take on particular tasks or ask me to lead things. And I would say in my elementary years, when I was in what we call prep school, when I was growing up, and being asked to speak on certain things or certain issues, be a part of certain competitions that involved speaking and getting others involved, and then going to high school. And there was a voting for the captain of the class. And I was captain of the class a few times, and I was on the student council for the school. And then about 16 or so, then in the top 4 or 5 of who would be the leader of the council for the school. And that school had, 1,000+ students. So school years, K through 12, and teachers recommending me, and then looking at my peers' responses to suggestions I had made or viewpoints that I shared in class. So those early years were really important.
And I know from having our own personal conversations, your mother was very influential in showing you how leadership is modeled.
Mhm,
Were
mhm,
there a
mhm,
lot of women when she took you to those political events, campaigning, or was it primarily men?
mhm, mhm.
And then your mother as
Well,
a
you,
leader
you you
too.
preempted a bit of it, so I will go into that. So yes, certainly both my parents, as we were speaking about women in leadership, the primary influence, especially in my early years and continues to be, is my mother, who is an educator, was a teacher in the third grade level, and then went on to be an administrator through the government and with the government. And I remember as a young child seeing and hearing conversations about our political system. And one of the things in which she was involved in the 1970s, when I was younger, was a group called the WFM, the Women's Freedom Movement. No doubt an impact and outflow from the women's liberation movement here and the civil rights movement in the 1960s in the US and women's movement following that. And so I would attend those meetings with her. My sister and I would attend those meetings, and I remember going at least twice a week. And Tuesday and Thursdays come to mind. I don't even remember if those were the days, but I remember going at least once a week during the political election seasons. And I don't remember all the content, but I do remember the feeling. I remember the community. I remember sitting on the stoop because, we were children, so we weren't, sitting in the seats in the auditorium or the meeting room, whatever it was. But I remember sitting on the little step with my sister, and we would be there. And I remember bullhorn or mics, and I remember women with clear voices at the mic and women with clear voices in the audience responding in that call and response type of way. And I also remember chants, and I remember, hands in the air, and a proclamation, if you will, of freedom, of the way the country needed to go, and this type of thing. So I think I was moved by the passion and the focus and the intention of all women in one room. And my mother was a part of that, speaking, leading, advocating, influencing, leading to bring about change, and getting out the vote and those kinds of things. So when I look back, that was very influential, and I will tag onto that experience because there are other influential people and other influential women in my family and in the community and in the church as well. And I would add that 7 years of my life was spent in a very, I want to say, elite and very special girls' school. And that from ages 10 to 17, which is all of my adolescent or teenage years at least, and some pre-adolescent years, influenced me again greatly. So it wasn't the political yelling, or not yelling, but that passion and grace and goodness and power. And yeah, there was yelling. There it was some of that, and the academic, administrative, policy related type things, and then experiences like Model UN, like floral arranging, like learning different languages, like things related to computers and things around debate, drama, you name all the fields that there were. I saw at that time, so now moving from the 70s with the political parties, I saw at that time in the 80s now, women, girls doing everything. Girls swimming, girls playing badminton, girls being involved in debate, Model UN, as I mentioned. And I remember going to those sessions and participating in those assemblies. And I also remember some very spirited discussions. We had a course, which was a social studies advanced course called General Paper. And it was a course to learn about anything in life, from Tiananmen Square, what was going on, apartheid, understanding poverty, understanding post-colonial life, understanding the history and economy of slavery and the plantation economy, understanding the liberation and abolition movements and work in the 18th and 19th centuries in and around slavery and then abolition, and the role of communities, social activists, the role of some churches at that time, education to free and liberate peoples of color, indigenous peoples and Black people. And studying that and having the opportunity to be a part of history by entering those years 2-3 centuries ago, and what was planted in me, and I did study history at the advanced level and economics and so on. What was planted in me was that I am and that we are a part of that long history of liberation and freedom. And if they did it, so could we. And
That's
in
a
my mhm,
sorry, that's a perfect
yeah,
segue into this current moment. You're
mhm,
going to the University of Maryland, Baltimore to
yes,
serve as the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Vice
mhm,
President.
mhm,
And this is a moment talking about history. This is a what people consider to be a racial reckoning
yes,
for the
yes,
United States.
mhm,
So when we think about women in leadership and how women are leading in this moment,
mhm,
right now that you have a number of organizations not just making statements but also looking to hire people not just as DEI officers, of course,
mhm,
but as CEOs. And so when we think about women in general, women of color in particular,
mhm,
and we think of those that have been at the upper echelons of business and organizations, I just want to run a couple of names off. We
sure,
have, I remember looking her up,
mhm,
and Andrea Jung, who was the CEO of Avon, right?
mhm,
And I think she was the first woman of color to be CEO for
mm,
Fortune 500. Uh, um, Oh, no, no, she was not. She was the second. The first
mhm,
person was Catherine Graham in 1972 for the
mm,
Washington Post.
mhm,
And then over a period of 20 years, we had people like Ursula Burns for Xerox, um, Indra Nuji for PepsiCo,
mhm,
Latina Geisha Williams for Pacific Gas and Electric. And now recently we've come into Tashonda Brown Duckett for TIAA,
mhm,
Rosalind Brewer, who was the CEO now for Walgreens, and recently as well, Rashida Jones for president of MSNBC. But in the
mhm,
midst of all of that, right, in the midst of all this racial reckoning, we also have Vice President of the United States, Kamala Harris.
mhm, mhm.
What would you say is the toll that women of color who are leaders, what is the unspoken toll that they experience in doing their work?
Mhm, mhm. So first, I want to acknowledge the success, and I want to say new recognition, if you will, of the talent, the power, and the expertise of women of color, and as you said, particularly women of color. And in that group, I also heard very significant Black women, African American women, who are including Kamala Harris, who's also of Asian descent, Indian descent. I want to acknowledge those successes because the reckoning to me is a reckoning with the oppression, colonialism, racism, and all the other ills and types of oppression that there are in our society. And it is a reckoning with the loss that that has brought about of talent, of wisdom, of excellence, of freedom for people to be who they are and to be accepted as they are with the talents and the resilience and grit and brilliance that they and that we have.
Mhm.
And the second part of that is my understanding, from my perspective, those women would not have had an opportunity had it not been for many others who, as we say in our vernacular, through blood, sweat, and tears, created a path for them and for others and for me. The toll and the price when people ask about, and I by no means compare my achievements to what they have accomplished. I'm honored to have served in the roles in which I have served, and I am well aware that it has been through great mentors and sponsors who have helped me, and I am hoping and continuing to carry on that tradition. What I know for sure in these positions and what these women have reported and what I have seen myself is in order to be, I want to say, just right, or in order to be sometimes accepted or given a place, if you want to put it that way, at the table, in the room, there's a tremendous, and research has shown that there's a tremendous amount of psychological, emotional, professional, occupational labor that women and women in particular, of color in particular, have to expend
Mhm.
in order to be seen as legitimate, valued, valid, in their roles. And so where we are now is I have found that some of the reaction has been knee jerk, and it has also been with a sense of urgency and desperation. So whatever is happening, and many of the places that you have named are corporations. What I've also seen, broadly speaking, is that in healthcare, in education, higher education, which is where we're both situated at the moment, in community, in religious, in political institutions, we're also seeing it. If you look at the administration now, the federal administration, if you look at those persons, there are more women and more people of color there. And that's a social and political dynamic. And in higher education, the number of deans, the presidents that you're seeing are either more women, more underrepresented persons, people from underrepresented groups, and or Black people, are being chosen not just for EDI related roles, but to be provosts, vice provosts, executive vice presidents, and presidents. And so I think it is.
Oh, sorry, go ahead. Go ahead.
I think it is at Emory in the last year, and maybe even before Mr. Floyd's murder, that the first Black dean was at Emory, and at Wharton also. There are changes there. George Mason hired its first African-American president. He's an African-American male who's actually from the University of California system where I am currently. And so you're seeing these kinds of hires, and I am hoping that they will lead to systemic and structural changes and not just be token hires or placements there to satisfy a demand of a community or a particular view, but that it will be a strong commitment both in heart, in practice and policy is how I want to put that, both in heart and mind and for future practices.
When you talk about the toll, the emotional toll, the psychological toll, the physical toll that leadership, wreaks on the bodies of Black women, women of color, it connects for me to a story I heard on the BBC early this morning, about it's okay to be mediocre. Right. And people can go listen for themselves, check BBC mediocre. And it's for today, May 28th, 2021. And I listened to that. And immediately I said, I have to ask Diane this. Can mediocrity and leadership for women of color go together?
This is a tough one because as we're talking about earlier, the emotional and psychological labor is in part about the self-monitoring that peoples of color tend to do and that women do. We have a double, triple, quadruple, however you want to think about it, bind, an intersectional bind, in that there is the element of proving our worth or our merit. We already have it. We know that we do. And it is navigating multi-dimensional spaces that are different from ourselves, both in terms of, sometimes in terms of gender, culture, ethnicity, you name it. We are different. Then we have different approaches philosophically, and we have different approaches in terms of our values. And when we're in those spaces, my experience has been that we not only demonstrate our worth and sometimes work overtime to do that, being on time, making sure every slide is perfect, making sure every statement is clear and crisp and concise, making sure that you have the answers for questions that no one else has the answers to. And then if there is a very tense or moment of microaggression, macroaggression, or hostility of any kind, I think the implicit understanding is that we will take it and also self-monitor in a way that is acceptable and seen as respectable, civil, and in order. So, and these are not my words, this is also in the research, particularly around how Black women executives and executives of color have to navigate. And this is in a medical setting, health setting, educational, and political settings, right? Everything that Hillary Clinton did, or everything that Kamala Harris has done, or Elizabeth Warren, you name all the women in politics, women of color in politics, Stacey Abrams and others, a number of things are critiqued about ourselves. Attire, physique, hair, makeup, whether we were a headband or not, natural, curly, straight, heels, no heels, perceptions of body politics and what it means about who we are as people, our level of discipline, our level of performance or commitment to excellence. there are a number of things that we see in psychological studies and our experiential lives that are monitored. We are monitored in a societal sense, as in socially, in that professional setting, and we also do this to each other, which is an internalized dynamic of oppression against women and persons of color, and Black people in particular. So, there's so many aspects to what you're saying, Heather, that I'm thinking about. The moment of 2020, the racial reckoning, which is one of the areas where you started, the labor that's taken there, while you're also saying that we're saying this all in the same breath of, but look at these amazing people and the things that they've done. And to me, it's a very multidimensional, multi-level analysis to think about all those elements, and even discussing it is slightly stressful, to be honest, because I'm thinking, gosh, that's a work day for many of us.
That's right.
That we navigate all of those pieces that I just mentioned, psychologically, physically, yes, professionally, which is the work, or occupationally, your status and the position you have. Am I doing well in this associate vice chancellor role or this new VP role? How am I being assessed? What are the thoughts and the feelings and perspectives about that? So those conversations are happening, or dialogues are happening intrapersonally.
Yes.
And they're also happening interpersonally. So for mentors and sponsors that we trust, we can say, how did that go? What did you think about that?
Right.
And it matters to me what they think, because I am hoping to do good work. And beyond that, I want to do excellent work. And there's a way in which I, at times, and this is something we experience as a collective, we seek approval from our social group.
Well, let's take the burden off of us for a minute and put it on to the majority leaders in the country, in the world, white men. In this day of racial reckoning, global reckoning, can these individuals be leaders without being intentional in terms of their motivations and their practice? Can they be a leader without understanding DEI and not simply depend on their diversity officers, if they have one, or the people of color in their organizations? Has the day ended for organizational leadership to function without being cognizant and practicing DEI in terms of measurement, in terms not just a couple of anti-bias trainings, but they themselves modeling, leading, thinking, doing?
Yes.
Is this the day? Is this the moment?
Great question. I don't know that I have the definitive answer on that. What I do know is that we're at a tipping point. And the short answer to can they continue to do this, historically we know that they have. And the leadership, when we talk about leadership, I don't necessarily qualify ineffective, effective, moral, immoral, or unethical, or whatever it is. I think in raw terms, have they been able to influence a group of people to move forward on a particular initiative or process? And the answer, even to questions related to Hitler, the answer is yes. The answers are yes and yes. Can they do it? Have they done it? Will they continue? The answer is yes, yes, and yes. At this moment, because of the necessity of the moment, the cries and the outcries of communities of color and of Black people saying no more, and in one way or another, this institution will fall, whatever that means, right? Financially, in terms of the media and this kind of thing, because people have seen there's some economic, maybe even moral, some social, some organizational implications in the wrong direction, negative implications for their work and their organization, they're paying attention. I cannot speak to whether the paying attention will lead to organizational and societal change for sure. What I do know is more leaders are paying attention differently. And what I'm very heartened about is that many are interested in allyship work, which is where we need more depth. And many are interested in not just allyship work structured and organizationally, but many are doing work that is intrapersonal, within self, examining attitudes, beliefs, social messages and messaging. And in safe and brave spaces, they've also been checking in, not only with people of color, but with their other white ally friends and colleagues to say, I want to find a way to do more of blank. Right. And usually that means providing more opportunities for people of color, thinking about a more racially inclusive and a more equitable institution. I am finding that there's more curiosity about that. And my data for this is the uptick in consulting and training requests, not just internal to the institutions where I work and the units within that, but then colleagues of mine who are reporting, especially if they do consulting, training, and organization development work, their phones, symbolically are ringing off the hook. Often it's by an email outreach or a LinkedIn outreach, that they can't keep up with the demands from nonprofits, from government, from health, from corporate institutions, from government institutions with RFPs, requests for proposals, saying, we need this kind of analysis, we need this review, and we need help. And so that is heartening to me. I think the story will be told in 5 years from now, 5 to 7 years from now, which is just about when organizational change can really take hold, that I would be interested in 2025, 2026 to see how enrollments changed at universities. How much more funding have historically Black colleges and universities and MSI, minority serving institutions and Hispanic serving institutions and others that serve these populations? How much more money has gone into supporting and building infrastructure for these students, scholarships for them, increasing access to them and their families, because many of these students come with their families. So I'd be interested in those things. What policies are in place for promotion and tenure in higher education, for leadership development and access for mid-level managers in nonprofits and in social and community organizations, where people are doing the work to bring about equity, diversity, and inclusion and social justice? Where have these allies and these organizations put their money and their intentions and actions? And so that's what I'm very much interested in.
And that's exciting. I have to admit, what also needs to happen simultaneously is more mentoring and more sponsorship, more people of color receiving those prime assignments that allow them to move up the ladder. Indeed. Right? Because right now, you don't get the assignment. The assignment is given to a friend, right? You have that affinity type of sharing. Right? I share with the person that looks like me. But if we're talking about respecting, loving all of humanity and benefiting from the results of that love, right? Where people can go to work and actually breathe, right? Because often, as we mentioned earlier, when you talk about the toll that it has on people's lives, people are watching the news or experiencing what's happening in the news and then having to show up to work and pretend everything is okay. Yes. Leave their feelings, leave their experiences at the door. And when they get in there, no one is saying to them, hey, how are you feeling? What do you need? Yeah. More of that needs to happen, an actual human connection, and stop thinking of people as simply numbers filling the diversity roster, right? To report to government or whoever these reports are made to, if you want to, win Organization of the Year, etc. We're coming down to our time, and I want to use this to give you the opportunity to make a closing comment about something related to leadership and women of color that is pertinent to you.
Thank you, Heather, for the opportunity again. Actually, this is not a prepared set of remarks, but as I heard your comments on mentorship and sponsorship, I do want to finally address commitment. And commitment and intention, because what we need is, although I write some of them myself and I contribute to them, what we need is less statements and more action. When I talk and I work with staff, when I'm involved in any consulting work or anything like that, employees, society, we're sick of thoughts and prayers. We are sick of, we stand with. People want to know what that means. And so I would say to our listeners and to any broader groups, anyone who's in leadership, thinking about leadership, think about what your commitment might be and what your thing might be that you would like to advance. And access is a big part of that. And so I would say, what's our commitment? Let's think about what that commitment is in whatever sphere of influence we have, and with a small group or a big group of people, act on that.
I agree. If you're going to be an ally in the room, not after the meeting's over. Be an ally in the moment.
Yes.
People need to hear your voice in that moment. People need that support in that moment, not in a corridor after everything's done.
Right, right.
Diane, this has been fabulous. Thank you so much
My
for
pleasure.
being here. Ladies and gentlemen, please check out the Forward Women's Forum website. A lot of activities happening there. Please choose one, participate in one, or choose more than one and participate in more than one. It's been a joy for me to just spend time with Diane for this half an hour.
Thank
Thank you
you.
so much. Everyone have a great day.
Thank you, Heather. Thanks for the opportunity. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.